Cool. Well, welcome, my brother. This is awesome. So looking forward to
Yeah,
this.
likewise. Likewise, excited for it.
I don't know if I don't know if I warned you about this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyways. Who is your favorite athlete?
That's a great question. Being Dominican, Pedro Martinez is first to come to mind. It's just he gave me the highest highs watching him play. So not too surprising, but definitely Pedro Martinez comes up top of the list. Just
Yeah, he
too,
would be high on my list too, actually, as a Red Sox fan.
yeah,
And
so good.
some of his antics throwing at the Yankees were particularly memorable. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it was good.
um, so I like to actually start at the beginning. I remember my story, but what's your story about how we met?
So I remember quite vividly. It was a very difficult times as I was getting ready, or actually pretty far into my fundraising period, but with no success. I was probably November 2014. I reached out since you were a fellow Yale SOM alum, and I was leveraging that connection to ask you for a coffee so that I can go pitch you my search fund in the Dominican Republic. So that was about November 2014, roughly.
Yeah, we met at a Starbucks on Boylston Street in Boston, I think,
That's correct. We
for
met
about
there,
20 for
and
about 20 minutes.
yeah, it was very quick. I'm like, I'm not sure if that went well or not so well, but I tried my best.
All
But
right, so
yes, sir.
the rest is history. So we'll get into all that. So I like to try and ask some big picture questions first. Um, so as you look back now, um, over your career so far, what are you most proud of?
So definitely, taking the leap, following my time at Yale, which obviously was an amazing experience. So being able to go down and decide to go down a search fund path was definitely something I'm very proud of, where I kind of turned down any ideas of formal employment, kind of taking that jump. And I would say kind of tied to that decision to embark on the journey. I'm very proud of the job creation we've had here at CCD, which at this point is about 1,300 newly created jobs in the Dominican Republic. So that very closely tied to making that decision to go down the path of entrepreneurship through acquisition or a search fund, and tied, which is the job creation that we've been able to accomplish, which makes me very proud.
So what do you think your kind of personal strengths and weaknesses are, and how's that kind of played out in terms of your career?
That's a good question. Personal strengths, I'll start there with strengths. I do believe that perseverance is a strength. I just tend to not give up. Yeah, so I tend to not give up ever. And that might be a little crazy, but I just don't give up. So I think that helped me through, my application to business school, where I was actually a reapplicant to Yale. I didn't get in the first time. And then starting the search fund, I get a lot of rejections from the just investors who weren't willing to invest in the Dominican Republic, and even through the CEO, just perseverance and just keeping moving forward when you don't have anything left in the tank. So that's definitely I would say a core strength. I definitely like to lead people, and that whether I'm a good leader or not, I desire to help others. So I think that helps me as a strength. So I would kind of call those two items as strengths. In terms of weaknesses, there's definitely many. Uh, some of it is overly, or sometimes I don't listen the first time, and you may know that from me. So it takes me a while to kind of internalize things. So I may not be a good listener at times, which obviously something I'm working on. My attention to detail has gotten better, but it's definitely a weakness that I'm trying to work on. Uh, a little bit over promise, under deliver at times, right? So kind of seeing the world too rosy and not being grounded enough. So I would say those three weaknesses kind of weigh me down. But just that perseverance and will to not give up, I think, has helped me through all the roadblocks I've encountered.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I was talking to one of the students this week, and we were talking about how sometimes like your strengths and your weaknesses can be the same thing. And just in watching you, like I think sometimes like the number of times I was in a board meeting where I screamed at you and like told you like you weren't paying attention and that basically you're full of shit. And
Yeah.
then like you kept coming back, um, showed your strength, like what you're saying that you never give up. And at the same time, like part of the problem was you're so optimistic and idealistic that you would see the glass as half full unrealistically.
Yeah.
And so like it's kind of the same thing. And I think as I've watched you, um, you're still have the perseverance, but you're also much more able to see what's realistic and finally, learn how to under promise and over deliver, um,
Yes.
which
I
is
learned
a
the hard
key.
way.
Yeah, yeah. So what was the most fun you've had in your career so far?
So in terms of fun, it's very tied to some of the accomplishments that over time they have compounded. I think to your point, living in the over delivering, where we've been doing well, especially kind of that post COVID era where we really kind of had a really good stretch in terms of growth, especially that first year that we beat budget. That felt very fun. We are kind of like, smiling as we went like ahead of plan, which for us was not normal. So I think for me, that would tie for first, call it when we're kind of ahead of plan, especially that 2021 was really fun, where we kind of broke that, $10 million revenue mark, went into that 14 million and then 20 million. So that hyper growth in terms of revenue was really fun. And honestly, I would say that, and I know you are not always the fan of our big investments in Christmas parties, but I would say that when I would sit in these Christmas parties, and just to give some context to the audience, these were very large, 1,000 person plus events in the same location, and it resembled a very kind of Christmas tradition in the Dominican Republic. We celebrate Christmas quite big and lots of dancing and really good spirits. So for me, just kind of sitting in a corner or even on stage, witnessing all those people, I'm like, wow, this is really fun. This was all worth it. So I would say that that had obviously been the most fun when we kind of had a chance to kind of celebrate and look back and see all those people having fun and kind of knowing that you had and something to do with that. That was a 10 on 10 on fun. So yeah.
Yeah, so like just one comment there. Like so we're gonna talk to several CEOs. This happened to be that I've made these investments in Latin America and one of the things we do is we go to places like the DR and we try and build, basically US companies there with the professionalism and the kind of approach of a US company. But you also need to like acknowledge the local culture and like take the strengths from that as well. Although some aspects just would drive me crazy. For
Yeah.
instance, in the DR in December, you get paid twice. So you get like a double salary in December.
Yes.
And then they have these like crazy expensive parties. Like our party costs like 125 grand. And I was like, what are you spending this money for? Like, we can't do this. And Khalil's like, yes, we do. We are going to do this. So. It's just one of those traditions that actually builds culture and builds loyalty. And Kalil and I ran this contact center for U.S. imaging companies, and so it was really a company all about people, recruiting, training, and retaining people. And so the culture is incredibly important. So things like that party, as much as I would complain about it, were
Yeah.
also incredibly important. Um,
Agreed.
so let's go back to the beginning. So you grew up in the DR. Just tell us a little bit about what your childhood was like.
Yes, so I'm born and raised in the Dominican Republic. Was fortunate, born to an entrepreneurial family. My grandfather was a renowned business person in the agriculture field, and father was engineer, and my mom was very close and supportive. Just very great mom from a discipline standpoint, just really educating us and just grew up in that kind of entrepreneurial mindset where there's greater impact, and was fortunate to go to kind of a U.S. School. So it was mostly led by the embassy, the U.S. embassy here in the Dominican Republic. So I was educated in English through the U.S. curriculum. So that kind of guided me. Very fortunate to have those perspectives, but I think was very unique that I also was exposed to, really the underprivileged in the Dominican Republic, right? There's obviously a lot of people and poverty. So for me, I felt, growing up, kind of a sense of calling that, hey, I'm one of the lucky ones, and these people are not so lucky. They obviously make an attempt through baseball, which is, for often or for most of the population, really their only way to move across social classes or really have a better life. So I just kind of felt a very interesting perspective because I did play baseball. I wasn't as good as Pedro Martinez nor any of his friends, but I did play competitively, and I could see, my player, like people that I played with, obviously came from a very different social background. So for me, I just grew up with a sense of purpose of like, I want to go back and I want to help create impact in the Dominican Republic, because if everybody who has privilege goes to the US and kind of stays and works in Wall Street, you're not giving back. So it kind of, I think that was the catalyst where I grew up in a country that obviously has very key challenges from a people from education, poverty, etc. So just I felt a sense of privilege from my grandfather being able to pay for my studies, not just in the DR, but also going abroad to do my college and then further my MBA. So I did feel like a calling, just because I,
So
I was fortunate.
you ended up going to college in Canada, right?
Yes, correct. I went to Montreal to Concordia University, studied supply chain management and finance, worked in finance at GE Capital for 3 years. Kind of I saw finance as a way to learn a lot more or faster at a young age. So I was always drawn to, I don't want to work 30 years before I, learn. And in finance, I felt kind of teaches you kind of in your 20s a lot. Like you're more important in finance in your 20s than maybe in operations. So I found myself at G Capital and kind of seeing that learnings, and then found my way to my MBA, which kind of was the bridge. I always kind of want to say, hey, I want to do my MBA, and obviously was fortunate to get into Yale, and that kind of gave me kind of a very broad view. Okay, now I have to find my way back to the DR, and that's how I learned about the search fund model, and so
Yeah,
forth.
so you were so there was no search funds from Yale at the time, right? So how did you hear about the search fund model and what was your thinking about it?
Yes, it was a very foreign land back then, and I was really like the oddball when people were talking about, oh, I'm going to do investment banking, I'm going to work in consulting, and there was a couple entrepreneurs from some startups, but I said I want to do a search fund. They're like, you're so weird, like that doesn't make any sense, right? So it was very foreign at the time, and the way it came out was very ironically. I was at a Harvard Yale game, the annual football game, and I went to Boston that year, and I was hanging around some of my Dominican friends and some of their friends, and I was just kind of articulating, right, as any MBA students do. What are you doing after the MBA, right? I'm like, look, I want to go back to the DR, something financial. I'm not sure, maybe if I can buy something. And one of the Harvard guys said, "Hey, it sounds like you want to like sounds like a search fund." And I'm like, "What's a search fund?" Well, yeah, go read up. There's a Stanford primer, and I remember on the train back from Boston to New Haven, I was downloading that primer online, and I read it on the train back, and I'm like, it was like an aha moment. I'm like, this is exactly what I need to do and what I want to do. So I learned about it part of it, I was already gearing towards something entrepreneurial, not sure what it was. I knew I wanted to be financially kind of oriented. And when I found the search fund model, I'm like, yes, this is it. Like, I want to go operate, but I also like the idea of buying something. I like the idea of making an impact. So it really felt like perfect for me. Myself, I would say, kind of going back to my strengths and weaknesses, I thought it'd be easier, to be honest, than it actually turned out to be. But on the flip side, it's more rewarding than I thought it would be at the end of the day. But definitely, kind of that's how it came about. And then I went back to Yale, obviously, stayed around a little bit, did some research on certified models. And then after graduation, stayed in New Haven as I was doing the fundraising part because I definitely committed to it right after my MBA, which I graduated 2014.
Right. So so guys know like what he's talking about is the primer, which is on the Stanford search fund site. It's still there, as is the Stanford study that people will refer to that they do every 2 years. And so like just so you guys know like how for the students like how like the actual like fundraising. And so in in terms of the search model, which I'm not sure we've kind of talked about explicitly, but the searcher raises enough capital, generally like 500 to $750,000 to pay themselves a salary for 2 years and pay for deal expenses. And then once they find a transaction, then the people who invested in the search part have the first right to invest in the deal. So there's kind of two parts, and generally there's kind of 10 to 12 uh, investors in the search. And so and like I think it's changed somewhat, but like at least at the point at which Kalil was raising his search fund, people just follow the leader. It's kind of like they're lemmings. And so like if somebody who's very influential jumps into the search, a bunch of other people will follow. And so what happened was I met with Kalil and I felt, why not? Why not? The guy's from Yale. I'll give him a shot. And so I literally from Starbucks, I emailed Will Thorndike, who has already been on, here at the class. And I told Will, I was like, yeah, I think I'm gonna back this guy Kalil from Yale, whatever. And so right in that email, Will's like, okay, I will too. And as soon as Will decided that he would also invest in the search fund, everyone else would because
Mm-hmm.
he's that influential. And so at that point, it's just dominoes. Like everyone's like, oh, if Will Thorndike's doing it, then I'm doing it too. And that's what happened.
That's 100% what happened. And kind of, I had reached out to Will before with no response. And then Tom kind of pushed that domino, and then that domino hit the other, and then kind of just like whoop. And then obviously, it really became a lot easier to kind of go through the motions
So
and
just talk about. I'm not sure we've talked with anyone else about. What was it like to actually conduct the search? What was that process like?
the search was actually quite interesting because once I completed the fundraising, I moved back to the Dominican Republic, and you have a, generally speaking, a 2 year period to go find a company to buy. So your goal, whether you want to bring on interns or people to help you, is to go search literally for a company to buy, and you want to come in with some conviction of which industries you want to look for. So what I did was more of a top down, here are the 5 industries of interest, and you start to build a list of companies in your geographic location, in my case, the Dominican Republic, and you start to reach out, try to meet, try to ask about the company, and obviously, bring forward your intent if you're interested to acquire that company. And it goes through a motion. It was very interesting because at the beginning, you feel like you have all the time in the world, and you kind of feel very, awesome because you're like, oh my God, I have 2 years to find a company. That's 2 full years. You're feeling pretty good. You have a fully raised fund. You're kind of full of energy. Obviously, once you start to go through the motions, you realize that it does have a lot of complexity because you're dealing with people. It's not just the offer, it's not just the paper or financial. You have to build a connection with the seller. You also have to look at diligence, and really once you get to agreement on early terms. You have to, do all the analysis. We found a lot of, and we're not going to go into all that detail, but we found a lot of things after diligence. But part of the challenge is that you have to understand what are the characteristics of the business and try to make sure that what you buy is what you think you actually bought. But you go through that motion. As you get further into the process, you realize we closed after 19 months, so pretty close to the 2 year mark. So it does take a while to search, and then it does take a while to convince someone, and then do all the paperwork, and then the offers. And the worst part is that deals fall through. So sometimes you might have a deal that you think is going to close, and then it doesn't close, or you get outbid, or the seller. So again, lots of complexities, but it goes through phases. You have to literally go out and search for a company, and you do that by knocking on doors, email, calls, showing up at conferences. In our cases, I believe we did a really good job with river guides. So we had people in the industry associations kind of open doors for us a little bit quicker. So we really in our case, we fell in love with the call center space, the BPOs, and I was able to do a very good review of the 55 call centers that were in the Dominican Republic at the time.
So what happened? So explain the first 6 months as CEO.
That was the hardest times of my life in the professional sense, and probably even the personal sense, because it spills over to your own persona, right? Especially, I worked so hard to raise investor capital, both at the search fund, but also at the deal. You raise a lot more money to buy a company than you do to do a search. So at the time, we raised over $6 million, and we acquired a company that we thought was making healthy profits and was growing very fast. Um, Takes me to very dark days, but I remember we bought the company in January 2017. I had met Tom in February, and everything seemed fine. Everything we were excited. We're at a conference at Yale. We're speaking about search funds, and then right after I get from the Maxwell conference, I'm kind of doing a deeper dive on the financials, and then I click enter after I did a fully built QuickBooks reformat of everything we did, and I saw a negative number, and I couldn't believe my eyes. So then I had to like refresh the number, and it was still giving me negative, and I couldn't believe it. So it was a very deep shock. Obviously called the board and said, we have a problem. So it was a very difficult time because we had to fix it, right? There was no choice. And things were actually way worse than we thought. And, things happened with the former seller, or changes in some things that we missed, but some things that they did right before we came in created a lot of problems. So the first 6 months was really the toughest because I'm a first time CEO. You kind of come in day one with starry eyed, and then you kind of have red eyes because you don't sleep for weeks. So it was very challenging. It did teach me a lot, I would say, on things not to do ever again or things to correct. But Tom and the board was, all three of my board members were very helpful and supportive, obviously pushing me to fix it. But it was very tough because we had to bring in new team members, fire some team members, renegotiate contracts to turn a positive margin. Um, so that was the most difficult time of my career by far in those 6 months.
Yeah, so you spoke about team. So talk about how over not just the beginning, but the whole course of the investment, 7 years or whatever it was, the process of building the team and how important that was and how you went about it.
Yeah, I think in my case, it was a difference maker, especially in our industry where specifically it's primarily a labor business, right? Specialized labor. We do healthcare outsourcing, so it does have a higher degree of specialization. At the time, AI was still very nascent, but we needed the right team. So one of the things that I believe I did well was, and the board was supportive, was bringing the right people on the bus early. So most of my team has been around with me for 6+ years, some people 8 or more. So I brought someone in from who did the search with me. I hired a CFO, I hired a VP operations, I hired our VP HR, and we really built a very good team early that was still in development, right? They're not your all stars, highly paid executives. They're more like your AAA prospects that are trying to go to the major leagues. But I was able to find good talent, top talent, and a little bit of raw talent that could grow with the company. So the board helped me and backed me in selecting these people and getting the right team. I think was the difference maker. So we came in with a very difficult, or I would say bad deal, where we had a negative um, margin in our first year, but we put the right people in place, and then that team helped turn around the company. And even through the 7 year hold, we faced COVID right in between, which for us was extra hard because our work is all like we're a service. So it's not like you have a factory and people are just working from home, but the product is in the warehouse. You had to take the people that are, sitting in production rooms doing the calls and had to take them from home. And obviously, internet quality, background noise in the Dominican Republic, and even electrical outages are a common thing. So we had to deploy a incredible logistical plan in record speed, and having the right team was the only reason that we're able to work overnight to get it done, right? Because once you have the right teams, the right people in the right seats, and they buy into your vision and your culture, they're going to go the extra mile and the extra, 10 miles and the extra 100 miles because they believe, and it's true that this company is also theirs. So I do believe that for us, that has been our key success factor is team and culture, and we really invested a lot in it. And I think it paid dividends for us in the 7 year hold.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna ask you about it, but you brought it up. So, I mean, kind of in the middle of that 7 years was this COVID, which was a disaster for us. If you guys can imagine, like each one of these thousand agents is highly dependent upon both electricity, internet, but also they're scheduling imaging appointments for US customers on all these systems. And so, in order to have all that pulled out of an office setting and being located at home, in a country where there's not reliable internet and there's not reliable electricity, is like virtually impossible. And thankfully, by the time we got to that point, we had such an amazing team that we were there are many call centers in the DR. We're the only ones who were able to do it. And so that this challenge, this incredible challenge, actually turned out to be um, a big advantage because we were able to do it and no one else was. And so it really turned, I mean, we had been making a lot of progress as a company, but it was really the turning point for our company, both in terms of competitively, but then also I just think in terms of like our confidence in ourselves. So we're like, wow, like we can do shit other people cannot do. And so that there's this kind of like internal momentum at that point that kicked off that allowed us to kind of really grow much more quickly.
100% agreed. And I think that was the catalyst, and it was like the test of fire for us. And it was very tough, right? Because for us, we've kind of went through a very tough couple of years. So I was like worn out already because we just had to turn around the company. We had problems with his IT. We have a lot, and so we're kind of getting up, and then COVID comes, and then it's like we kind of successfully crossed that bridge, and we're like, there's nothing we can do as a team, right? So I do think, to Tom's point, that ability for us to be so good at working remote allowed us to grow, especially those years right after COVID, where a lot of US operations were in disarray. We were able to grow the fastest. We actually grew a little bit during the COVID year. And then the years after, in within 2 years after COVID, we more than doubled the business from $8-9 million revenue to 20 million. Within 2 years because we had a very good remote operation, and it ultimately benefited us in the medium to long term.
So we figured out the top line. We learned how to grow the business. we still had an issue with profitability. So what was the kind of margin on the business at that point? And then what happened when Pete Flick, who you guys are going to hear about, you're going to hear from Pete later on in the class, but when Pete showed up.
Yes. So we had figured out top line. We had grown a lot. And our margin, if you remember, we had a very difficult first year with negative, and then with like a single digit. But we kind of plateaued in that 12 to 13 range for multiple years. So we kept growing every year, but we're like, our
So
margin was
12, so
still,
guys, so 12 to 13% profitability. And when we talk about profitability, we're talking about like the cash that's coming off the business, which is what we call EBITDA, which is earnings before tax, depreciation, and interest. So it's basically like how much cash as a percent of the revenue is actually coming into your pocket. So 12 to 15% was where we were, which is not great, honestly.
yeah. And Tom was pushing, say, hey, we need to get to 20, right? And then I'm like, we can't do 20. And part of the limiting belief, I would say, part of it was, well, the peers are not getting there, or you know what, we did all the cutting we could, but I do believe that there was a lot of barriers that when I evaluated it, I just couldn't see us going beyond, right? And I think Peter was an excellent, and Tom recommended us to work with Peter as part of kind of the later stage um, evaluation of margin. And Peter just really helped me decompose not just the mechanics, but also my mindset first, right? So for us, understanding what does the margin mean for shareholder value creation, and even for my personal value creation, and really helping me not have limiting beliefs and kind of start with from a white canvas of like what can be done. And that really allowed me, and Tom said we got to get to 25%, and the board as well. And Pete was just someone who helped me decompose the entire company, look at expenses left, right, and center, but helped me believe that it was possible, right? And something magical happened. It's kind of hard to explain, but it was a little bit of, if you believe it, you can do it. And at some point we started making one decision after the others, and my team didn't believe it was possible, right? So neither myself nor my team believed it. We just kind of say, hey, okay guys, let's just do all these actions and see where we land. And magically, once we complete all the actions, we ended the year at 25% margin. And for us, we grew EBITDA 113% in 1 year. And this was not year one, this was year six. Coming into, actually, no, this was year seven. My bad. So in our last year, we grew EBITDA over 100%, 113%. So I'm like, one, I was like, I in disbelief because I'm like, why didn't we do this before? But two, we're glad we did it, especially right because we were getting ready for the transaction. But we just had a lot of, I would say, systems that we could have automated, right? So this was 2024. We're still doing things like it was 2017. So technology played a factor. We also did we worked with consultants to do some spans and layers. There's a lot of things that we just weren't doing. And to some of my weaknesses, I wasn't hearing what I needed to do. And then at some point, like I realized I had to do it. And the way that Pete helped me unlock my own limitations just was magical. It's hard to
So you guys
explain.
understand. So the reason why this is important is so Pete came in kind of a year before we were thinking about selling the business. And so the way you value one of these businesses is as a multiple of profit, multiple of cash flow. And so when he says like we increased cash flow by 110%, that means directly that we increased the value of the company 110%. We more than doubled the value of the company. But it's actually more than that because businesses that have a higher margin are valued at a higher multiple. And so not only did the actual cash flow go up 110%, but then that cash flow was more valuable. And so the business itself, honestly tripled in value just based on those
Yeah.
actions. Um, So just talk a little bit about the exit process. And these guys have just gotten their first feedback from Sheen, who I know you're very familiar with. Um, and maybe talk about Nasheen first and then talk about the exit process.
Yeah, so I think, one of the awesome things working with Tom and the board was that we got a lot of advice and thoughts, and working with Pete and then later Nasheen was a difference maker. And one of the things that I had never gone through the exit process before, but Nasheen was awesome because there is a lot of things that you do as a speaker that if you can bring a different energy, a different tone, different mannerisms, you eliminate your crutches. She helped prep me to be a better presenter. So having her coach myself, me and my team, so a team of three others, right before we had to articulate to potential buyers why they should buy CCB and why it's a great company, the ability for you to communicate more effectively has a significant impact on what people are willing to pay for the company. And that for me was kind of mind blowing, right? Because you kind of look at the company, we talked about, the revenue and the profitability and obviously how you bring in and improve the company. But something as simple as improving your communication skills could actually improve the value of the company, because the way it works is once you hire an advisor, call it investment banker, to go to market to see who wants to buy your company, they're going to want to interview the key leaders. So myself and three other members as part of a management presentation. So in these couple of hours, you're presenting to these buyers, and every word that you say and how you say it and how convincing you sound may change the multiple between, 7 times EBITDA or profitability to 8 times, right? And that half a turn or one turn could be millions of dollars, right? And if they like you as a team, they're going to pay more. But it's so incredible because she gave us like a crash course, and it came across as our team was very in sync. So we were saying the same language, the same tone, the same professionalism, that the audience was like, well, this is a high performing team, that I'm going to inherit for a couple of years is going to be very valuable to me. So I'm going to pay more. And I think Machine was a difference maker for us because she gave us just things that we were doing that were just not great speaking skills. And while we still have room for improvement, she elevated her game significantly. So it's hard to know how
Yeah,
much she, yeah,
no, but I was just sorry to interrupt, but one story I was going to say was like, so there were there
yeah,
had to be uh, four management team members in these final presentations. So basically, people bid for the company, and then they figure out who the top, four or five bids are, and those are the people who get the full on management presentation. And so we knew we kind of did need all the four people who ended up in the meeting, but like half the people were so bad, I didn't want them in the meeting. Like
yeah.
I literally was like yelling and screaming, like saying, "No, I actually like the guy who's more junior because these guys can't frickin' talk. I've seen them in board meetings." And then
I remember that.
after the actual management presentations, so the investment banker goes around and talks to all the buyers and like says, "Hey, what do you think?" Every single buyer said it was like one of the best management presentations they've
Mm-hmm.
ever sat through. And like we're like, home run, man, home run.
A hundred
And then
percent
we
home
and we
run.
ended up like I said, we ended up selling the company. We're under NDA, so we can't tell you the exact numbers, but we ended up selling the company for in excess of 3 times what we thought we were going to sell the company for at the beginning of the process. Like, when we
Yeah,
started talking about it a year prior, we ended up selling it for more than 3 times what we believed we were going to get. So,
yeah. And I have a vivid image of you, Tom, when I was saying the names of the people that I was thinking, you say, "Oh, who do you think would be the top four to present?" And your face was like just cringing, like, no, I'm not that person. Because the way they presented in board meetings for years was just not engaging. It was a little bit of monotone. And after it, like they just really flourished. And I think one of the things that helped me is our team was very much a growth mindset. They're still younger, so they want to learn. So they all really leaned into Nasheen. But I think it's important you have to really lean into it. It's not gonna happen by chance. So they really followed her lead. And one particular ultimate buyer was not the buyer like ultimately acquired us, but he said, "Look, I've been to like 100 of these, and this is the top six. Like this is one of the best presentations that I have seen, and I'm a family office guy. I see this all the time. You guys were just like on point, sophisticated, sharp. You guys were like very professional, and it was very cool to see. So
So
yes,
let's
that
just wrap
helped.
wrap up before we let the dogs loose here and ask some questions. So what do you so the deal closed like 18 months ago, is that right?
14 months ago, yeah.
14 months ago. And so you have a 2-year earnout. Explain what that is, and then maybe just a word on what you hope to do after you get out of the earnout.
Yeah, so I think for us, it's a 2-year period that is required to ensure a smooth transition. So many times in deals, one party, specifically in this one where you're in a different country, different geography, you want to make sure that what you buy kind of doesn't fall apart. So there's a lot of intent to keep the team around and and make sure that what you say you're gonna do it. So the earnout just sets targets for profitability after they buy, and they want to make sure that you kind of push yourself to keep maximizing the value of the company. So there's different targets. We're currently wrapping up our first year, and then we have another year. Well, we wrapped the first year, but we're going to then go to second year. So at some point down the road, when I believe it's time to move on, I definitely want to be in the Dominican Republic, in the impact arena, whether it's more through business and then maybe through policy. I like and want to stay involved in the search fund community. I think it's just an awesome group of people. So I do want to keep personally investing in search funds. But from my skill set, I do believe that I can bring in a lot of value to business in the Dominican Republic because this is where I'm from. And having the ability to access capital, but also talent in a small geography and still feeling somewhat on the younger side gets me pretty excited about what can I do in the next 30, 40 years. So definitely very homegrown, but just feeling very blessed and grateful to an awesome set of investors and board like Tom that really believed in me when things were not as easy to believe in and really kind of persevered with me through the tough times because they were very tough and it's not just it's true we were very tough but we had a very great comeback kind of a bit of a like a movie like Rudy type thing. You kind of come in at the last game and you figure something out. But definitely very very grateful and obviously this was a life transforming experience, right? You kind of have the ability to have personal freedom, financial freedom, so things that I would only dream of a few years ago.
Yeah, so there's a couple clarifying points there. One is the company that actually bought us is from India, so that's one of the reasons for the earnout. And the way the earnout works is that there's actually part of the purchase price that's dependent upon the financial performance of the company each of the 2 years after the close. And so, depending on Kalil and the team's performance in terms of how much profitability that they're able to achieve in the first and second year after the close. Khalil gets economics based on that, and we as shareholder get economics based on that. And so there was a portion of the purchase price that was delayed until the performance during the earnout period is determined. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so let's go with that to a few questions.
Yeah, I think being genuine, authentic, and really showing commitment um, goes a long way. I think with Tom, obviously, he meets a lot of potential search fund CEOs and search people that are interested in raising fund. I was just very determined. I just kind of could come across as maybe okay, he's a bit naive, but he knows like he really wants this, and he's he's gonna try his best, and he's an honest guy. So being genuine, authentic, and just showing commitment, I think is key.
Yeah, my thought when I first met you, Khalil, was like, you are completely full of shit, but you're a good guy. I'm gonna roll the dice.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's helped me is I have to do a few turns at everything I do, right? So sometimes it's like instead of trying to do something like one shot responding to an email in 5 minutes, I do it once and I do a second or third run. So I think that's just I'm just very conscious about that weakness. With regards to public speaking, there are things that come up that you'll get feedback on with machine. It's just trying to make sure that you bring in the extra consciousness. So just reviewing it more than once is what has helped me the most, to be honest. These are great questions, by the way. But it is the only way we made it work was with a very unique focus on values and culture. Like we were like talking culture, breathing culture, and we're acting to protect culture. How do you create culture? You as a CEO have to bring it down and you have to make it kind of your core values, make it the company values, and just find people that are going to live by them. And you have to hire and fire by values. And this is how you make it work. When people are not living how you want them to do things, but they are top performers, you're going to have to make a tough decision to let them go. So people know that you're not going to bend the culture. And the great thing about culture is at some point, once you do it well, it takes a life of its own. So the culture will reject people that are not living that culture. Because the reality is that if one of our values is doing what's right or makes you see yours, right? It's another one. And if you have 1,200 people, some people may be doing what's wrong, right? But if you have a sense of purpose, people can find things escalate. You have open door policies, but you have to create an ecosystem because the bigger the company gets, you cannot be everywhere at once. So you need to just trust that a very strong culture of values is going to guide people's behaviors. So I just very purposely invested in culture and creating a best in class place to work. And that was the key differentiator to attract talent, to retain talent. And for us, it's kind of difficult because they have to speak English because they're doing all the work in English. So we have a more limited talent pool, and we're competing against other call centers as well at times. So for us, we had to find the edge, uh, and having the right people in the right seats at the end of the day, right? We need the best HR people we can find, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be recruiting and retaining most of the talent.
Good answer. All right, two quick questions and we're done. What is your favorite movie?
The Sandlot comes to mind just to keep up with the baseball theme that we started with. It was a great feel good movie.
And so if you can leave the students with one word to remember as they think about their careers, what would the one word be?
Perseverance is the first word that comes to mind because it's really been something that has helped me towards my goals. So once you believe in something, just persevere. Don't give up. Things that are really worthwhile don't come easy. So just keep going. So perseverance is the number one word that comes to mind.
Awesome, brother. Thanks so much for spending an hour with us. It was
This is
really fun.
awesome. No, it
Yeah.
was my pleasure.
Yeah.
If you guys need anything, just reach out. Happy to help and hope it was helpful. Thank you all for
Awesome,
your time
man.
today.
All right, we'll be in touch.
Big
Big love.
hugs. Take care.
Yeah,
Bye
big
bye.
love,
Big
man.
love.
Talk to you. Bye.
Thank
Likewise.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.